Paranormal M is your gateway to the mysteries that defy explanation. Subscribe and tap the bell to stay connected to our spine-tingling episodes. Let the haunting adventure begin. 2 stories from China. The first story. I am watching you. This story is probably the most known one in Chinese universities. A few years ago, a young female student leapt to her own death. Afterwards, it's said that this girl would visit the room she committed suicide in. However, nobody knew the number of this room, gradually because the administrator of this university blocked the passage of this message. 1 year before the Chinese traditional Spring Festival, most students had returned, but a girl continued to stay in her dormitory. At night, this girl heard a strange noise in the corridor. This noise sounded like a footstep, but was slower and loudlier. This girl was a bit scared because there was nobody else in her room. At first, the girls supposed that there was a thief outside, probably, so to avoid attracting attention, this girl turned off the lights and kept silent. However, she still heard that the noise was approaching her, and finally stopped before her door. This girl was so scared but had to repress it. And at this moment she heard a sentence, "I'm watching you." This girl was surprised because the door was locked well. There was no possibility that she was supervised. But to protect herself, this girl got under the bed. She supposed that it was safer because of the darkness. However, she heard the sound again. "I'm watching you." And at this moment, the girl saw a strange light underneath the door. In fact, as mentioned above, the young student who committed suicide leapt to her death and landed onto her head. Therefore, this girl could not walk on foot on the head. And the loud and slow noise was caused by this. And also, for the same reason, the dead girl was upside down, so she could watch her younger schoolmate under the door. Yikes. The second story. The Revenge of Trianashide. In China, a small town along the Yangtze River abounds with a kind of Trianashide. Trianashide. And local residents find this Trianashide delicious, particularly the meat around the shell. Because this piece of meat seems like a skirt of the... Oh boy. This word's going to pop up a lot and I'm going to say thing. Because this piece of meat seems like a skirt of the thing, and local residents call it the thing's skirt. However, it's said that the thing is brilliant and could perceive the human's emotion. For instance, when they hear somebody's attempting to catch them, they would hide secretly. Also, they could remember the appearance of the hunter that they met and would probably have revenge. Therefore, before starting the work, the hunters must cast a spell to hide. One day, a young man went out to hunt for this thing, and his wife stayed at home. A few hours later, his wife heard that somebody was knocking on the door. They found there, standing, a strange lady. The hunter's wife asked the lady who she was and why she was visiting here. To the hunter's wife's surprise, the young lady responded angrily, "Your husband is too rude. Just now, he molested my sister, then teared up my sister's skirt. How dare he is?" The hunter's wife knew her husband's job and heard something about the thing before, so she responded calmly, "Excuse me, my husband's honest and mild-mannered, and I'm afraid he would never molest any girl, and possibly you have mixed the culprit for my husband." The young lady was silent for a moment and then continued, "Okay, perhaps I misunderstand it. By the way, I have heard that your family sells these things skirts, and can I buy some?" I want to have a try." After hearing these words, the hunter's wife doubted the identity of the young lady immediately and supposed that this lady was probably one of these things who came here for revenge. Thought of here, the hunter's wife repressed her nervousness and said calmly, "No, I'm afraid you make a mistake again, because nobody hunts for these in our village. But I know a man who lives in an adjoining village that runs this business. You can visit him to buy what you want." After hearing this, the young lady didn't reply and left. Shortly afterwards, the hunter returned and complained, "Today I have nearly caught one. I've touched its skirt, but it finally escaped." And at this point, his wife narrated what happened just now, and the hunter realized he had forgotten the spell in the morning. I'm going to try to say it again. Trionichide. Sounds more Japanese than Chinese. Just so everybody knows, it's T-R-O... I messed up spelling it. Trionychide. Trionichide. A scary case from official files. When I was a teenager, I heard about this story, but I deemed it to be an urban legend at that time. However, 2 years ago, I read it again from an official document, so it should be true. At the beginning of the 20th century, a fat man traveled to Chengdu, a large city in western China. He was there to sell herbal medicines. After a few days, he had sold out all of his goods and prepared to have lunch before returning. In a small restaurant, a young guy sitting around struck a conversation with him. The young guy told him that they were fellow villagers, and he had seen the fat man before. After this meal, the young guy invited him to go to his home because it was so rare to meet a fellow villager. The fat man agreed because he had sold all of his products, and there was no need to go home immediately. At first, the fat man wanted to leave after several hours, but the young guy urged him to stay for several days because, in the young guy's words, it was so difficult to meet a fellow villager in this city. Thus, the fat man stayed for several days. After a few days, when the fat man was going to leave, the young man handed over a letter to him to ask the fat man to deliver it to a relative on the way home. The fat man agreed eagerly. A few days later, the fat man found the place of the relative of the young guy, but it was very late, and the fat man was reluctant to knock on the door then for the next day. At this moment, however, he heard a conversation begin in the house. The fat man was suspicious. Why is anybody up talking at this hour? He attempted to know what was being said. After a few seconds, this fat man hurried away and summoned the police immediately. What happened at that moment? In fact, the curiosity of the fat man had saved his life. That's because of the horrible conversation he heard is as given below. Why has that poor man not come yet? Don't worry, he will not be too long. All right, but I need to see this poor man now. I've heard that he is so fat that his body will be able to contain all we need, and that's great. After hearing the last sentence, this fat man sensed danger. He crept away and then opened that envelope in private. Troublingly, this letter described nothing but the name, occupation, home address, and other information regarding this fat man. And at this moment, this fat man realized that the fat man in the conversation must be himself. So he called the police, and the police arrested all the people in that house at once. So what happened exactly in this process? In fact, the young guy and his relatives were villains and drug dealers. They conducted their business in the following way. Firstly, the young guy sought a foreigner in Chengdu and selected one who was not very bright. Next, the young guy invited the person whom he had picked to go to his home so he could gather information about his target. Usually, the young guy preferred to choose those who were single and destitute. Thirdly, the young guy would ask the potential victim to deliver a letter on his way home, and the destination was the haunt of the accomplices. Finally, after learning the identity of that potential victim and ensuring there is no risk, the criminals would murder the victim and hide opium in his body, and this was how they smuggled their shipments of drugs safely, transporting them inside corpses that they claimed to be on their way to the funeral. I've heard my fair of similar stories, but not quite like that. Not paranormal, but I found it interesting. A ghost boy. This story is so famous in my hometown. In the 1970s or 80s, my hometown was rather underdeveloped. The industry was just launched, and most people still live in villages. One day, a boy was born in a family. At that time, it's sort of habitual that their parents should take the kid's birthday to ask for life from a fortune teller. So did this family. When the boy's parents arrived at the famous soothsayer's home, the soothsayer was reluctant to give any information. Such silence was not a good signal. The couple knew it immediately. Without any choice, they urged the soothsayer to illustrate what was the problem. After a long time, the sayer finally spoke something, and in his words, the life of the boy was very unstable. It means that his spirit did not fit his body very well because the spirit was too rampant. The only solution was to look after the boy carefully before his 12-year-old birthday. If the boy could grow up and cross that date, his spirit would be mild. Resultantly, the boy could avoid an early death. The couple was so worried but was given a life straw, and after returning home, the couple called up the parents both sides to let them know this. To look after the boy carefully, the 6 members of the family designed a duty sheet. The young couple had to carry out more jobs in the field, so the 4 seniors shared more efforts in looking after their grandson. No matter what happened, they must guarantee that the boy should be in one site at least. The strategy seemed efficient. Although the boy had encountered a few hazards, a family member saved the boy quickly. After an intense period, everything seemed to return to the right track because the boy became more bright and knew to call his family to help him if he met something troubling. On the eve of Chinese New Year, the family had to collect some firewood and buy something for the forthcoming holiday. So all the members went out except for the grandmother of the boy. Perhaps the mother of the boy's father, and the woman was so cautious she kept the boy at home and closed all the windows and doors to avoid any potential danger. At that time, there was no cell phones or TV sets. The old woman also felt tired, so she put the boy into her bed and went to sleep together. After a moment, the woman woke and realized she'd dreamed a strange dream. In this dream, she saw a group of kids in a forest. All kids looked anxious and nervous. One kid was screaming why the older brother had not returned yet. The others also echoed. The old woman was so curious and gazed at them continually. A few seconds later, the old woman saw a boy who was a bit older, and they were running toward the group. All kids surrounded and embraced the boy and asked him why he returned so late. He should come back in 1 or 2 years ago. The boy sighed and said that the family he lived with was so cautious. One family member monitored him day and night, so he had no chance to run away. But today was the eve of the new year. 5 members were out and only an old woman stayed. So the boy caught a chance. However, the boy complained that the old woman was so cautious that she had shut up all the other passages. The boy looked for a channel for a long time and finally escaped via water. Realizing this strange dream, the old woman felt something terrible and found the boy was not in the bed. The old woman got up instantly and rushed into the kitchen because there was only one place containing water, and as a result she saw the boy was in the water tank and died for a long time. The family noticed that the tank might be a potential problem, so removed it to a tall table so the boy could not climb to the tank unless he stepped on a chair. And I occasionally imagine what happened when the lady was sleeping. what the expression in the boys' faces, and there's any relation between the boy's death and the strange dream. A ghost warden. I have a friend who is proficient in divination. That's when I was in college. One day, I had asked the girl about her skill and how she knew so much. And I was shocked because the girl told me that a senior member of her family was a ghost warden. The girl then told me several stories about the senior. Thereafter, I called the senior D because D is perhaps the initial character of his family's name. The origin of this position. According to the girl's description, D has nothing to do with any religion or magic until he was 50 years old roughly. One day, D fainted suddenly when he was doing farm work outside. Fortunately, D was discovered by his family and took home that day. However, after waking up, D told his family that he's traveled and visited the hell just now. At first, his family members thought that D was in a confused state of mind, so nobody believed his words. Since then, they found that D started to discuss something related to religions and divination. This was so abnormal because the jargon in the two fields is quite challenging to understand, and too remote for D shortly afterwards. D started to predict some trivial matters, such as the weather and the recipe of the neighborhood, and his prediction was quite precise. Since then, D's relatives started to believe what D had described before. Over time, D fainted frequently, but he would recover by himself. One day, he told his family that he had been employed by the head of hell and would be a junior officer there. Henceforth, D's divination became more powerful, started to present some mysterious power. The change of fates of two young men. One day, D went to some sort of a fair to buy some daily necessities. Met a friend unexpectedly. This friend was so happy that D was so curious about it, and later his friend told D that his son had found an excellent job, would start the career the next day. At this moment, D's friend demanded D to foresee the young man's future, and D employed 4 pillars to make this. By the way, 4 pillars is traditional divination, which arranges the birth year, month, date, and hour to be 4 criteria respectively. However, D became so nervous soon and told his friend that his son would die soon, according to the information presented by the 4 pillars. His friend was shocked and begged him to do a favor. D refused to help at first and stated that this result was inevitable. But D's friend did not accept it, but begged piteously. Finally, D told his friend that there was a possible solution, but it was too vicious. If carried out, D and his friend would be punished by heaven. To persuade D to do this trick, D's friend gave D a lot of money and agreed at last. D told his friend that the only chance to save his son was to find a young man who was born at the same hour as well as his son firstly. Then D's friend spared no effort to do this, found a young man successfully at last. After doing this, D told his friend that his friend should take this young man to a place in particular, at a particular hour one day. And if this poor young man did this, he would replace D's son's friend and die immediately. Even though D's friend felt this method was too evil, he still did it to save his son. According to D's suggestion, D's friend visited the poor young man and stated that he wished to introduce a decent job to him. This poor young man was so happy and followed D's friend to that destination. Once they arrived at that place, this young man fell suddenly and died instantly. Shortly afterwards, the police came to investigate but found no wound in the young man's body, so they deemed it an accident. The magic named to compel ghosts to carry sedan chair. One day, Dee took his kids and wife to visit a relative who lived in the rural area. Because the road was so uneven, his kids and wife couldn't continue to walk. They would arrive at the destination earlier. Dee determined to use his mysterious power. At first, he commanded his kids and wife to close their eyes until they permitted them to open. Besides, no matter what happened throughout this process, they must not open their eyes nor speak. His kids and wife agreed. He started to spell this. After a while, Dee told his kids and wife that they could reopen eyes now. They were surprised that they could see the house of their relative already. Dee's wife saw the watch and found that they'd closed their eyes no more than half an hour. That was while this journey usually took more than several hours. Also, Dee's wife recalled that she never felt anything uneven. So even though Dee's wife knew that her husband was proficient in such magic, she was so curious and asked what had happened just now. Dee told his wife that he had summoned a couple of ghosts to carry them by sedan chairs. 3 urban legends occurring in Beijing. The first story. A few decades ago, a tailor managed to shop around the south gate of ancient Beijing city. This tailor was so skillful and friendly, so his shop was famous in Beijing. One day in the middle of the night, the tailor just went to bed, but someone was calling him at this time. The tailor asked the visitor what he wanted, while the visitor said he just wanted to buy some needles and string. The tailor was afraid that the visitor was probably a robber, so this tailor just opened a small window and handed the needles and strings out. And at this point, the tailor attempted to see the customer's face, but merely found there was a bracelet in the wrist of the customer. Afterwards, the customer paid and left, and the tailor also returned to his bed. The next day, some customers visited the tailor's shop and discussed a story. In their words, a culprit who had been beheaded disappeared last night for a while. Surprisingly, when the body of the culprit was found, his head and main body were seen together already. Also, the body was holding some needles and string. Some people distinguished that these needles and strings were sold by this tailor, so they came here to inquire the tailor whether anything strange happened last night. This tailor dubitated and then came to see the body of the culprit. At first glance, the tailor saw his needles and strings, and then he saw there was the same bracelet he saw last night in the body's wrist. The tailor was out of his mind and then narrated what happened to his neighborhood, a doctor who owned a pharmacy. After hearing the scary story last night, the doctor was not surprised, but responded calmly, "My friend, it's not a big deal. Every month, a few poor guys would visit my pharmacy to buy some vulnerary at midnight." Or vulnerary. Vulnerary. As well as the man you meet yesterday. Second story. If you ask me to name one of the most famous urban legends in China, I'd like to introduce this story at first, because almost everybody in China who was born after the 1980s has heard this story. I've read many different versions on the internet, and I'd like to select one which seems more reliable. In 1995, one night a bus was running to the suburb of Beijing, and the number of this bus was 375. Around the gate of a high school, a young man was waiting for this bus. That's because only this bus could take him home. When he found this bus, he started to wave his hands instantly. And after boarding this bus, the young man sat behind an old lady and found that there were 6 people on the bus, including himself, the driver, and the conductor. Quickly, the young man attempted to have a break because he was exhausted already. A few minutes later, the bus stopped again. 2 men got up. The young man glanced at the 2 men and found both of them were poker-faced. The two men did not talk, just sat down and kept silent. However, at this point, the old lady in front of the young man stood up suddenly and grabbed the young man tightly. "Nasty guy, how dare you try to steal my wallet?" This young man was confused, but responded, "I was sleeping just now and I never touched your wallet. Why are you trying to wrong me?" The old lady did not buy this, but asked the driver to stop the bus immediately. That's because there was a police station not far away from there. It seems that the driver was not interested in what happened, but stopped the bus to let the old lady and the young man leave this bus. After stepping out of this bus, this young man asked innocently, "Dear lady, I never touched your pocket. Why are you wronging me? I'm just a student." However, the response of this lady was so surprising. "Handsome boy, I've saved your life just now." The young man didn't understand, so the old lady continued to explain what happened and why she asked the driver to stop the bus. "Boy, have you noticed the two men who boarded the bus at last?" The young man nodded, and the old lady then continued. "When two went through me, I found something strange. Neither of them have feet. Do you understand? In other words, instead of stepping onto the bus, the two were floating just now. Therefore, I'm afraid they were not human beings. You know what I mean?" The young man was scared and was determined to report this to the police. Because there was a police station around there, the young man told the police what the old lady told him. But you can imagine the police couldn't believe the young man's words. However, at this time, the radio in the police station reported the news that a 375 bus went down a cliff not far away from there a few minutes ago, and there were 4 bodies on the bus, including the driver and the conductor. The third story. If you know something about China, I bet you must know a place named Babao Mountain. This mountain is famous because the graveyard of the top Chinese politicians is located in this place. And this story is about Babao Mountain Station. One day, a man worked so late then came off work at around 11:30 p.m. It's while the subway had stopped at this moment. This man's home was so remote that he wanted to have a try to get on the tube because calling a taxi was so expensive. To his surprise, there was a train that would drive in the direction of his house, and the man got on happily. After sitting down, this man felt something slightly strange. Generally, now it was around 12 a.m. while this train was full of people, and furthermore, these people seemed very tired and their clothes were worn out. Even so, this man was exhausted, and so he didn't think more. Because there would be an audio notification every station, he then closed his eyes and took a nap. A few minutes later, he heard an audio notification that this train had arrived at Babao Mountain Station, and he heard that many people got off. This man was so astonished why so many people got off here because this was not a significant station. But this man still closed his eyes and the train started to run. However, after a few minutes, he heard an audio notification which reported this train had arrived at Babao Mountain Station. This man was shocked now because he remembered that he had heard the same message just before. In addition, he found nobody on this train now. He couldn't understand why he heard the report twice, and why so many people disappeared so soon. Two real stories happened to me or involved me. This story happened around 10 years ago. It's when I was a student in high school. A few years ago, 2 friends told me that they had found something exciting. We 3 studied at the same school, but I was in another class. I was so curious and I asked them what it was. The 2 guys told me that they usually got up around 3 a.m. in recent several weeks, and after getting up we drifted to the city, as well as Flaneur, and in their words, they could perceive something hidden in the daytime. Frankly speaking, I was shocked by the 2 guys, and I attempted to be in, and I am afraid that I could not get up so early, and the two guys told me that I'd better not get too close to the window tonight to guarantee that I could hear their voice. And at that time, I didn't hold a cell phone. Around 3 a.m., the two guys came to my apartment and called my name. I went out to meet them. Then we strolled on the road happily. Even today, I couldn't recall that intriguing feeling. But what happened next was so horrible. We continued this action after this. The trigger was a short conversation between the two guys. To present it clearly, I quote them by my memory below. "Do you know the girl who joined in our class this week?" "Yeah, of course, I knew her, and her name is HPY, right?" "Exactly, I've heard something about her. Her father passed away several days ago, and it's so terrible." "Oh, I see. It is terrible." After hearing this conversation, I replied unconsciously, "Wow, that's terrible. This girl's so poor, she lost her father." However, my voice faded and the two guys kind of stared at me in surprise. They said, "Boy, you sound strange. Who lost her father?" I replied in surprise too. "Of course, HPY. You two guys discussed this just now." The two guys looked at each other and said, "No, we never said such words, definitely." "Why, you said that the girl lost her father. Your words are so offensive." I felt something alarming, but I convinced them. "If you two never talked about the girl, I could not know her name, and as you said before, she was a new student in your class, so it seems impossible that I could throw her name so quickly. Also, I heard her name HPY from your conversation, and this is the first time I heard about the name." After my words, we three fell silent for a while. The two guys stated firmly that they've never talked about the girl, while I continued to defend my statement. All of us felt something horrible and strange, and afterwards, we discontinued this outdoor action. A malicious male prostitute and a fortune teller. Technically, this story happened to my friend, not me, but I have involved in this story at the final stage. About 2015. My friend, just call her Miss G, attempted to do some business in clothing. To lessen the risk, Miss G found a partner, a 30-year-old woman, and opened up her clothing shop together. Benefiting from Miss G's brilliant feeling on business and beauty appreciation, her career operated smoothly. About a year later, Miss G made out a bill and found the profit considerable. To celebrate the success, Miss G and her partner decided to go travel to Thailand because this country was not far away from China. And after arriving at the capital of Thailand, Miss G's partner stated that she wanted to enjoy the service of a male prostitute in Thailand and invited Miss G together. Miss G was not interested in this, so she did not go out that night. The next day, the partner returned and described her great experience with a young and lanky guy last night. Miss G didn't care about that and returned to China a few days later. After returning to China, Miss G found something strange. For one thing, in a month the visitors became less. She hardly found many regular customers. And for another, the sales in her shop dropped sharply. At first, Miss G guessed the decrease was caused by the change of season. However, in the following months, the sales performance became worse, and the shop appeared to be impossible to survive if so. Finally, Miss G planned on getting some help from a fortune teller. According to Miss G's description, the fortune teller, who lived in the northeast of China, was far away from Chengdu, and spelt magic to observe Miss G's shop. Firstly, the fortune teller described the outlook of the shop and the other brands around that one. To Miss G's surprise, all of the statement was highly correct. Then the fortune teller started to look for the cause of Miss G's business. After a while, the fortune teller said she had figured out the problem already, and in her words, most people who were walking across the shop had attempted to go inside to have a look. However, the fortune teller said that she saw a special light ball in the shop, and this strange ball was the culprit for Miss G's misfortune. In light of the fortune teller's experience, this light ball was not there at first, but appeared not long, and it was likely to be summoned by the owner of the shop. After hearing about this, Miss G recalled that she had done in the recent days but found nothing. So she had to doubt her partner and hunched this strange phenomenon was probably linked with the male prostitute. To figure out this problem, Miss G represented the fortune teller's words to her partner, questioned what happened that night in Thailand closely. Her partner confessed that she had intercourse with the male prostitute, and also, to mark this great time, she took some photos that night. After getting those photos, Miss G found some strange accessories on that male prostitute, and she firmly believes those prostitutes must be the cause of the misfortune of her shop. So Miss G asked her, or rather asked me, to help her to find out the functioning of them. To help my friend, I've read a lot of literature in this area and found out a suspicious one: a necklace. This necklace was sought after by the destitute because it was said that such a necklace could steal others' luck if the owner of the necklace could have sex with the victim. Also, the literature also illustrated that a considerable amount of prostitutes in Thailand would employ that to improve their income, even though all of them were aware of its adverse effect. Finally, I copied all of the information about that necklace to Miss G. Miss G lost confidence in her partner and that shop, and as a result, she closed it down and broke up with her partner. Brutal. Continuation of odd things happening in southern MO. Our sister, who moved out, had come over to help me and her two younger siblings while they went out for our mother's birthday. Everything was normal until it got late. About 7 p.m., my nephew, 2 years old, came screaming from our little brother's room where they were playing. He was screaming, "Scratches, scratches," continuously pointing at the wall. My sister, his mother, went to check it out after she calmed him down and stuck her ear to the wall. Nothing. She thought it might have been rats, but this is a problem we've investigated. No rats, no mice, nothing. Our brother often complains about this. And he was unperturbed, and we asked what had happened, and he told us that, yeah, there had been scratches on the wall. Normal, until he tells us that he was saying hello. Me and my sister looked nervously at one another and asked who he was. He shrugged and then showed us what he heard. One scratch said hell and one scratch oh repeatedly. Our parents thankfully arrived back home and we told them the situation. Everything came spilling out. Everyone was talking about her experiences and it all just clicked. Our mother admitted her experiences growing up in her home as a child and the weird things she's seen. So much. We're getting a priest out here. And what's really odd to me is that I just finished decluttering my room and had thrown out an old Bible of mine. I'm not really religious until shit gets too spooky. We went outside and looked through all the trash to find it and took it back inside. It's just weird how things picked up in correlation with me throwing my book out. Better safe than sorry. My younger sister, who shares this account with me, is currently sleeping with it at the moment since everyone's so wound up. My mom admitted she's been seeing shadows all week and talked about her imaginary friend named George from her childhood. Her brother's in the same room that she grew up in. We realized maybe our younger brother, who had been complaining about scratching and shadow figures, wasn't just saying it to get out of the bedtime. We're really worried it's attached onto him. He's seen having outbursts of anger, and since he's adopted from a bad home, this is kind of normal, but it's all just fitting too cozily. With him calling the scratching his friend and talking about him like they have a secret code, it's just worrying. He even said he was going to talk to people at school about this friend. I'll update anything new, but for right now it seems like things are getting worse before they can get better. I saw something in the sky as a child that stuck with me since then. Hey there. I'm not sure if this is the right place for this, but I wanted to share something strange that happened years ago. Something that even as an adult I never quite have been able to explain. I was around 9 or 10 years old when my mom and I moved from up north to the southwest of the UK. We'd just settled into our new home and starting a new school. And on my very first day, we had an assembly. For anybody not from the UK, that's a morning gathering where the entire school meets in the hall or to hear announcements from the teachers. Nothing exciting. Just them going on about, to be honest, I can't even remember. One detail that always stood out to me, even then, was how close the school was to a major naval base which was just down the road about 500 meters away. This particular base houses nuclear submarines and large naval vessels. And at the time, I didn't think much of it, but now it feels like it might be relevant. Anyway, I've always struggled with paying attention due to my ADD, attention deficit disorder. So naturally, my mind began to wander. While the head teacher droned on, I found myself gazing up through the tall windows of the assembly hall. It was around 9 a.m. The sky was a blanket of heavy gray clouds. Then something strange happened. As the cloud cover began to shift and thin out in patches, I spotted something in the sky. It didn't move with the clouds, it didn't shift or flicker or pass like a plane might. It just sat there, motionless in the break between clouds. A large triangular object, dark and metallic. It wasn't a trick of the light or a fleeting shadow. This thing had a shape, 3 distinct points, clean edges, and the presence that felt strange. My first thought as a kid was that maybe it was some kind of satellite or weird military equipment, but it seemed far too low, far too clear. It wasn't suspended in space, it felt like it was right there hovering above us, completely still while the sky moved around it. I remember blurting out something like, "Is that normal?" Like right in the middle of the assembly. The kid next to me nudged me and whispered for me to be quiet and to pay attention. When I looked back up, the clouds had rolled back, thick and unbroken. Whatever I'd seen was gone, just like that. I didn't see it fly away, I didn't see it vanish in a flash. It was simply there one moment, then it wasn't. It stuck with me ever since. I remember it vividly. Not just the shape or the silence, but the feeling that I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. I know it's easy to chalk it up to a child's imagination, or maybe that's all it was, but back then I didn't know anything about UFOs or strange sightings. I had no frame of reference, and I was just a bored kid looking at the sky. But I saw something, and I still think about it. Stories of druids, witches, and friends, told by old cousins of mine. These are stories I heard as a child, but they were not told to me. These are not children's stories, is all I mean. They were told in gatherings of family and friends by various cousins of mine from Albania, most whom have long passed. Back when gatherings had dozens of people, and back when they would happen, back when nobody would be bothered by far relatives visiting. All of these stories take place in the northern mountains called the Accursed Mountains. Impenetrable and barren, which is where all the folks I mentioned would live before they would descend into the civilization of the fields south of there and end their tribal and pastoral life. I choose to believe these stories simply because they were serious topics being discussed by adults in the room, and I, as a child, couldn't help but listen in awe and fear. The first story, or how a relative met a satyr in the forest, or the devil as she thought. A relative of mine, probably around 80 at the time, I don't even remember my relation to her, interrupts a family feast as she asks all to listen. Us kids would sit at another table and play with her food. She speaks of how she met the cursed devil when she was a girl which had wandered far away from home, by playing and fooling around. It was late when she had learned of the fact that she was far away, and she had found herself in the exact place her mother would urge her not to be. A forest so thick it was called the Black Log. It said the light of the sun could barely be seen from within. It was all fine, though. She would return home. However, before that would happen, she decides to drink from a stream that would run quite a bit into the forest to quench a thirst. As she approaches, a thin man was crouched toward the stream, drinking. As she comes closer, she sees that his legs were crooked, hairy, and backwards, like that of a goat, and that he was wearing traditional folk clothes. All would be sort of like that back there. They're terrified, but with the strong spirit of a Highlander, she gathers heart and asks, "What are you?" The creature, greatly surprised that he's been spotted, says, "The cursed devil is what I am." And he carelessly jumps away, hitting trees and bushes like a dog which flees from rocks thrown at him. The second speaks of a fairy, but not the western kind. My grandmother gets quite lonely during the day, as all of us others go to work, which is why she gets excited when people sit around and listen to her talk. She asks me one day, as I'm running from the kitchen, well fed, toward my room, to come and have a chat. She's kind and sweet, and I'm obligated to listen. She speaks to me of her father, how he was a mason who built his own house by hand, how she loved him very much, and how she remembers him still after half a century. She quickly jumps into an occurrence his father had with some sort of a witch, and she says, she tells when her father was a boy, living in the mountains, as they all did. It was on a cold evening, while restless, too energetic to sleep, that he lies awake in bed and suddenly spots a faint light coming from his keyhole. The light enters through and floats toward the side of his bed, and as he pretends to be asleep, sees the light transform into a woman. He jumps out of his bed and grabs the quote-unquote witch by her throat while demanding answers. The witch explains that she's been sent there by her lodge, and as her rite of passage, she would have to draw blood. The boy makes a deal, asks that his life be exchanged for that of his loyal dog, which is then butchered, drained of its blood, and buried the next day. The third, a real Western witch this time. This one comes from my great-grandfather, who spoke of this during a gathering. This was 2 decades ago, and he was still living in 90. When he was a young boy, he says, while gathering timber in the mountains, on a dark early morning, before the sun would come up, he would spot the most terrifying thing of his life. He said that above him, higher up in the mountain, there was a woman dressed in black, carrying a baby tied to her back. He, being surprised by this, raised his voice and yells, "And who art thee at this hour?" The woman, staring from behind her back, simply says, "No business of yours on who I am." And suddenly, the blink of an eye, the lad finds himself 50 meters away as if teleportation was a thing. The next morning, he went to the wise man of the village, who said that he was lucky not to have encountered a group of these people, but only one, as he would shortly have been dead otherwise. A lot of other stories I've heard, like how late night strangers would gather around trees and dance by the fire, or how shadows would play around the graves of loved ones, how snakes would defend a family's home, how wolves would never attack on Christmas, and much, much, much more. Grandma's voice. My grandma passed away last September. The creepy thing happened when my family and I went back for Thanksgiving. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, my dad asked to go over to my grandma's house with him to help look for some papers that are needed for the farm. He's digging through the closet in the basement, and I'm upstairs looking in the closet up there. But all of a sudden, we both hear my grandma yelling for help from her bedroom. We both drop what we're doing and run to the main floor of the house. We look at each other and we both nod to signal to the other that we both heard my grandma. We both then looked at the closed bedroom door and start stepping toward it. As my dad reaches out for the doorknob, we hear my grandma again, but much quieter, almost a whisper from the room. We look at each other again, gave a fuck this look, and sprinted out of that house. Turned away in the driveway, and I swear I could see my grandma sitting at the kitchen table just staring at us. My dad and I get back to his house after quickly leaving my grandma's house. I told him that we have to go back over there because I left some lights on upstairs and didn't shut the door on the top of the stairs. He agreed and said he didn't shut anything off in the basement. We pull up and park in front of the garage, and I come around the truck and I can see something moving in one of the windows. Before I can ask him, my dad says, "I saw that too, but I'm pretending I didn't." We go upstairs to turn off the lights because we don't want to go alone. But we notice all the lights are off and the door was shut and latched. I could accept the lights being off, but there's no way I could have forgotten. I shut and locked the door. It takes a good amount of effort to shut the door, not to mention the lock is a barrel lock. Requires you to spin and slide it to lock it. We ran to the basement and all the lights were off down there as well. And all the lights have the pull chain, and my dad swears he left all of them on. We get to the front door and hear my grandma again, but don't understand the words. My dad and I quickly walk to the truck and we notice a light on upstairs. I suggest we just leave the light on and just leave. He was already putting it to reverse as I said it. My dad and I never went back over to my grandma's house before I had to make my 7-hour drive home. My dad called me about a week and a half after Thanksgiving to tell what happened the following weekend after I had left. He and my brother went over there, still looking for those papers, and as they pulled up, all the lights were on in the house. They debated on even walking up to the door, let alone going inside. My dad really needed those papers to transfer the ownership of the property to himself, and he just wanted to get it done. My dad made my brother open the door, and when he opened it, they both could hear the old TV in the kitchen. They both walked into the kitchen and could smell a cigarette burning, but they couldn't see anyone. My dad turns the TV off, brother turns off a couple of lights, and they both decide the paper can wait, and they leave. My brother looks at the house as they pull away and sees all the lights off at the same time. And that's all they told me. I'll be going for a visit in a month or so. Might be a part 4 if anything else interesting happens while I'm there. I know you've been eagerly waiting to find out if anything has happened at my grandma's house. Well, here you go. I'm up visiting my family this weekend, and this happened at about 11 last night. I was watching a movie at my parents' house, and my phone started ringing. It was an aunt, and she asked if I would go over to Grandma's house with her. Guess they installed some motion detectors in the house, and she was getting notifications. I told her I'll be there, and I drove over. I pull up and see all the lights on upstairs, but no other lights in the house. My aunt pulls up a couple of minutes later. Grabbed the bat I brought along that we had had inside, and we take one step in and we hear banging going upstairs. We hesitate, but know that we have to go check it out. She pushes me to go in first. We can now hear footsteps going back and forth. We make our way up the stairs, and the banging's getting louder with each step. I fling open the door, and the banging stops. We look around, and there's nothing. All the windows are locked, and the balcony door is still latched and locked as well. The only thing we found was the attic hatch was wide open. The ceilings are about 12 feet, and the only way to reach it is with a stepladder. The light was on in the attic space, and this light has a pull string and can't be turned on any other way. Turn off the lights except the attic one. My aunt starts down with the stairs first, and I'm about to start as well when I hear a voice coming from the attic. It either said hi or bye and didn't care either way. Start running down the stairs and outside, and we jump in our own vehicles, and my aunt leaves. I text my brother before I leave, and I look up at the upstairs of the house as I put my car in reverse. I can see the light in the attic through the little vent near the roof. I see it turn off as I start to get back up to turn around. I think last night was the last time I ever go to that house after dark. One happened to me, and the other happened to my brother. One, this happened to my brother about a month and a half ago, but he told me about it earlier today. So he was just leaving our parents' house around 7 p.m. or so after stopping to help my dad fix his lawnmower. Maybe a mile down the road when his phone started ringing. He looked at it, and it was my grandma's number. He answered it without thinking, and the other end of the line was silent. He decided to drive over to the house since it was pretty much on his way home. He didn't want to since it was after dark, but knew he shouldn't just in case somebody broke in or something. He pulled up, and he could see the light in the attic through the vent on the side of the house. It was turning off, and it was like somebody was continuously pulling the string on it. And just as he parked his truck, he remembered there's no power to the house. He still went up to the front door to make sure it was locked, and as he reached the knob, he heard a very loud bang not far into the house. He said, "Fuck this," left very quickly, turned his truck around, and he saw the attic light turn off and stay off. 2. Earlier today, before my brother told me the story, my dad and I went over there so I could grab some wooden models my grandpa made a long time ago. We pull up and start walking to the house. I decided to look up at the second floor, and I saw someone or something looking out the window at us. My dad said he saw it too, and this window is pretty far above the landing on the stairs. In order to look out this window, you'd have to either be about 9 feet tall or standing on a ladder. We still went in and got these models, but we kept looking toward the stairs expecting to see something looking at us. I ended up taking more models than I intended and had to take multiple trips back into the house. I make sure not to look up at that window every time, just in case I'm still being watched by something. My family's ghosts. Stories that have been told by my family for 2 generations. As with most family stories, many of these have never been written, nor have these been shared outside of members of my family. To the best of my knowledge, these are true stories. For context, these occurred in Chicago during the late 20s and 30s. They were told by my grandmother. The Man on the Walkway. When I was young, maybe about 17, we're in the kitchen cleaning up after supper. Sitting near a window, I looked out and saw a man standing on the walkway. He had his face in his hands, and he would look up, and his face was covered in blood and horribly scarred. He looked up, then put his hands over his face several times, called my mother, and when we looked out, he was gone. She said I must have been seeing things. Never saw this man again, and sometimes later my mother learned from the building superintendent that a man working, painting a window on the 3rd floor, he fell from his ladder and died instantly when he hit the ground. My mother told me about this a year or so later, thinking I was too young to understand. Validated to me what I experienced was indeed real. The child on a bike. One night, my friend and I finished our shift at the factory. It was very late. Late enough that we needed to walk home as the streetcars had stopped running for the day. Our walk was about 7 blocks from home. And it was a nice night, and the streetlights were bright enough for us not to be afraid of the dark. We had just walked about 3 blocks when we saw a young child riding his bike. He crossed from one side of the street to the other side. We were concerned because even though the street lights were on, their light was not strong enough for him to see where he was going. We called out to the boy. They didn't pay much attention. Riding faster, he passed right in front of us into a wall of a building and disappeared. We learned later the paper reported a young boy was struck by a car near the location that we had been walking at. The impact of the car was strong enough to throw the boy and the bike in the same wall that we witnessed. The young boy didn't survive. Ghost of the young girl. The ghost on the street, and this happened to be in the very early 20th century, had to reach way back for this one. My great-grandmother and her husband had just closed their restaurant and were headed home. And at that time in southern Illinois, they had just public outhouses every few blocks. The These are hauled over from the 19th century, and my great-grandfather needed my grandfather needed to use the restroom, and he said that he would leave the door open a bit so he could make sure great-grandma would be okay. He was done taking care of his business when he saw a young woman walk past the door of the outhouse. He was somewhat upset as he had not finished dreeing when she walked by. He finished up and walked out to see this young woman turn into a breezeway. He followed. He was going to tell her how much that she startled him. He turned the corner and watched as she walked through a gate and disappeared. He went to the gate to open it and look, but this gate was rusted shut. But she was rather a thin girl and couldn't have opened the gate, and he tried as hard as he could and it wouldn't open. A day or two later, somebody asked if he had heard about the murder that happened. A young girl was killed when her boyfriend and man started fighting. She tried to break them up and stepped between them. One had pulled a knife, and rather than stab her boyfriend, the man stabbed her. She died in the hospital later, and the murder took place near the location of this outhouse. The old lady on the stairs. My grandmother was about 10 or 11 when she experienced this. She lived on the second floor of a 3-flat with her family. The building had very heavy steps leading to the top floor, which for some reason is very dark. Every so often they could hear heavy footfalls of somebody going to the top floor and stop, but never heard the door open, and this happened a few times when her curiosity got the better of her. When she heard the steps, she walked into the hallway. She looked down and saw a woman dressed as if in mourning. She had a heavy black dress and a veil over her head and face. She hunched over as though she were very old, and the way she walked was odd. She would drag one foot up the stair as she moved. She walked right past my grandma, brushing against her, and continued to the top floor when the footsteps ended. She told her mother what she had seen. Her mother told her that nobody lived on the upper floor for months, asked if she was sure about what she witnessed. Her mother asked some of the other tenants about it with what my grandma had seen. She was told the woman who had lived there died shortly after her husband had died. She came home from the funeral and walked to her flat, and no one saw her after that. She apparently died the following day. Since that time, people have heard her walking up the stairs. The flat has remained empty and locked ever since. As I said at the start, to my knowledge, these are all true stories. Theory on a popular Bengali folklore, the Sakchuni. A Sakchuni is a well-known spirit in Bengali folklore, often described as the ghost of a married woman who died before fulfilling her desires. She is said to wear a red or white saree with a shanka pola, a traditional Bengali bangle. They apparently haunt villages, especially targeting newlyweds or young women. But what if the stories we were told only scratched the surface? What if the truth is far worse? What if Shakchunis are not just restless spirits, but something far more ancient? Something that never truly belonged to this world in the first place? What if they aren't merely haunting the living out of regret, but are actively stealing life itself to reclaim their lost existence? Imagine this. The women who died tragically, whether by suicide, murder, or accidents, are merely the ones chosen to become Shakchunis. But the transformation is not immediate. It's slow and painful, like being pulled from reality into something darker. At first, they appear normal, a grieving husband, a mourning family, they feel an eerie presence, but they dismiss it as sorrow playing tricks on their mind. Then, one night, she comes back. She stands in the doorway dressed in her wedding attire, her bangles clinking softly as she moves. The husband, paralyzed between fear and longing, calls out her name. She doesn't answer. Her face is shadowed, her features blurred as if she's not fully here. Then, as he steps closer, he sees it. Her face is not her own. Her skin shifts, her eyes, once familiar, become bottomless pits. Before he can scream, she whispers in a voice that's not hers, "You let me die, now I will live again." Then the screaming starts. The next morning, the husband is found, his face twisted in terror, his body ice cold as if something had drained him of warmth of life itself. And somewhere in another village, a newlywed woman wakes up with a strange, unfamiliar hunger. What if a Shakchuni is not just a ghost? What if she's a parasite hopping from one body to another, wearing them like a disguise? Something really unnerving happened 2 nights ago. I don't know, WTF it was. So I went to bed at around 1 a.m., and as I was drifting into sleep, I started seeing this being lying in front of me. I clearly saw a misty white face, and I didn't just recognize who it was. It then began sucking my essence out. I don't know how to describe it. It siphoned a white snow-like something out of me. I saw and physically felt it flowing within me to outside of my mouth, and it was like I was drinking it. This essence that was flowing into its mouth. I suddenly jolted awake from an almost sleep-like state, and it was still there. I still saw and physically felt my energy being drank. A few seconds into me being awake, it phased, and it had a facial expression as it was suddenly panicked because I could see it and realized it. Whatever it was stopped and disappeared. I felt very drained even today, like my body's missing something. Like it took out 5 kilograms of something out of me. I feel lighter and weaker and emptier. I don't know how to describe it, but it's weird. It didn't feel hostile. I felt like it didn't want me to know it was there and doing what it was doing. Was it feeding on me?